You're just the help. Stay out of medical matters you couldn't possibly understand. Dr. Harrison's words cut through the pristine hospital suite like a scalpel through flesh. The renowned neurologist didn't even look at Martha Washington as he dismissed her, his attention fixed on the charts surrounding Richard Blackstone's bed. 20 specialists had gathered in the Billionaire's private medical wing. 20 brilliant minds with decades of combined experience, and not one of them would listen to the black woman in the housekeeping uniform who'd been watching their patient deteriorate for 3 weeks. Martha's fingers tightened on her cleaning cart. She'd seen that particular tremor in Mr. Blackstone's left hand before, 30 years ago, in a different hospital, under very different circumstances. The story begins 3 weeks earlier, when Richard Blackstone collapsed during a board meeting. The 70-year-old technology mogul had built an empire worth $60 billion, revolutionized 3 industries, and donated more to medical research than any living philanthropist. When he fell, the best doctors money could buy rushed to his side. Dr. Harrison led the team, Harvard Medical School's youngest ever department head, published in every major journal. The kind of doctor who reminded everyone of his credentials within minutes of meeting them. Martha had been cleaning the Blackstone estate for 5 years. Every morning at 6 sharp, she arrived through the service entrance. Mr. Blackstone barely knew her name, despite her being one of only 3 staff members with unrestricted access to his personal quarters. To him, she was invisible, furniture that moved and cleaned, background noise in his important life. The first week of tests revealed nothing. MRIs, CT scans, blood panels that cost more than most people's annual salaries. Dr. Harrison ordered exotic examinations from specialists in Switzerland, Japan, and South Africa. The symptoms didn't match any known condition. Partial paralysis that migrated between limbs, cognitive fog that came in waves, a resting heart rate that fluctuated wildly despite no cardiac abnormalities. The medical team set up camp in the estate's converted medical wing, bringing in equipment worth millions. Martha watched them work. She cleaned around their conferences, emptied their trash filled with discarded theories, and mopped the floors they paced while arguing about diagnoses. She noticed things they didn't. The way Mr. Blackstone's symptoms intensified exactly 90 minutes after his IV treatments. The slight yellow tinge in his sclera that only showed under natural light. The pattern in his confusion that matched something she'd seen before. Perhaps we're dealing with a new variant of Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease, suggested Dr. Kumar, the neurologist from Johns Hopkins. The others nodded thoughtfully. Martha had to bite her tongue. The protein markers weren't right for CJD. She'd read Dr. Kumar's own paper on that very subject while waiting in the estate's library during her lunch break. But speaking up would mean revealing things about herself she'd kept hidden for 3 decades. The second week brought more specialists. An endocrinologist from the Mayo Clinic, a toxicologist who'd worked with the CIA, a geneticist who'd mapped rare diseases in isolated populations. They ran tests that weren't in any standard medical textbook. Mr. Blackstone's condition worsened. His lucid moments became shorter. His body began to shut down in ways that defied explanation. His son, David Blackstone, flew in from London, pacing the halls and demanding answers the doctors couldn't provide. Martha submitted a written note to the medical team through the proper channels. She'd observed something about the timing of the symptoms that might be relevant. Dr. Harrison crumpled it without reading it. "We don't need housekeeping's medical opinions," he told his team loud enough for Martha to hear from the hallway. "This isn't some WebMD situation where everyone thinks they're a diagnostician." She tried again through David Blackstone. The younger man at least looked at her when she spoke, but his eyes glazed over when she mentioned medical terminology. "I'm sure the doctors know what they're doing," he said, patting her shoulder condescendingly. "But thank you for caring." By the third week, Richard Blackstone was dying. The 20 specialists had considered and discarded hundreds of diagnoses. They'd consulted with experts on 6 continents. They'd run every test known to medical science and invented a few new ones. The billionaire's body was failing in ways that shouldn't be possible. His kidneys showed signs of heavy metal poisoning, but no heavy metals were present. His liver displayed damage consistent with certain tropical parasites, but no parasites were found. His neural pathways were deteriorating in a pattern that resembled both Alzheimer's and malaria simultaneously. Martha stood in the corner of the room during what the doctors were calling the final consultation. They didn't notice her. They never did. She was furniture, background, invisible. Dr. Harrison was proposing an experimental treatment from Germany. Last resort, he called it. 50-50 chance it would kill the patient faster, but without it, Richard Blackstone had perhaps 72 hours. That's when Martha noticed it. The tremor in Blackstone's left hand. Not the random shaking that had been present for weeks, but a specific pattern, a rhythmic pulse that happened only when his eyes moved in a particular way. She'd seen it exactly once before, in 1994, in a small hospital in Gabon, in a patient everyone thought was dying from an unknown pathogen. "It's not CJD, it's not heavy metal poisoning. It's not a prion disease." Martha's voice cut through the medical discussion. 20 heads turned to stare at the housekeeper who dared to interrupt. Dr. Harrison's face flushed red. "Ma'am, I'm going to have to ask you to leave. This is a medical consultation, not a... It's Trypanosoma brucei gambiense, West African sleeping sickness, but not the standard presentation." Martha stepped forward, her voice steady despite the hostile stares. "He's showing signs of a CNS stage infection, combined with an allergic reaction to something in his IV fluids. The polymer coating on the IV tubes contains a compound that's causing the additional symptoms that are masking the underlying disease." The silence in the room was deafening. Dr. Harrison laughed. Actually laughed. "Sleeping sickness? That's absurd. Mr. Blackstone hasn't been to Africa in over a decade, and we tested for trypanosomiasis in week 1. You tested for T. brucei rhodesiense, the East African variant. The test doesn't detect gambiense reliably, especially in late-stage infections, and he was in Cameroon 11 years ago for exactly 4 days. A conservation project investment that he probably forgot about. The incubation period for gambiense can be over a decade in rare cases." Martha pulled out her phone, showing a photo from a medical journal. "Dr. Patricia Mendez documented 3 cases in 2018. Same presentation when combined with polyvinyl chloride sensitivity." Dr. Kumar snatched the phone, his eyes widening as he read. "This is... How do you have access to the Tropical Disease Quarterly archives?" Martha straightened her shoulders. "Because I wrote the peer review for that article." The room erupted. Dr. Harrison was shouting about security, about fraud, about having Martha arrested. David Blackstone was demanding to know who she really was. The other doctors were frantically pulling up medical databases on their tablets. And through it all, Richard Blackstone's tremor continued its telltale pattern. "Check my credentials if you want," Martha said calmly. She pulled out a wallet and removed a card that hadn't seen light in years. "Dr. Martha Washington, former chief of tropical medicine at the University of Kinshasa." published 43 papers on African trypanosomiasis between 1987 and 1995. Left medicine after my husband and daughter died in a car accident. Sometimes the only way to heal is to stop trying to heal others. Dr. Harrison grabbed the card, his face cycling through disbelief, anger, and embarrassment. He pulled up the medical database on his tablet, and there she was. Younger, but unmistakably the same woman. The citations, the groundbreaking research, the sudden disappearance from the medical community that had puzzled infectious disease specialists for decades. "You've been cleaning his house," David Blackstone said slowly. "You've been... Why didn't you say something sooner?" "I tried. 3 times through official channels. Once through you. Each time I was reminded that I'm just the help." Martha moved to Richard's bedside, studying the monitors with eyes that hadn't lost their diagnostic edge despite 30 years of dormancy. "Start him on a fluornithine immediately. Remove all PVC-based equipment. Replace with silicone alternatives. The drug interaction is causing the neural symptoms that don't match the disease profile." Dr. Kumar was already on his phone with the pharmacy. Dr. Harrison stood frozen, his world-renowned ego crumbling in real time. The other specialists scrambled to implement Martha's treatment plan, suddenly seeing the pattern she'd identified. The pieces that hadn't fit suddenly clicked into place. "The travel records," one of the younger doctors muttered, pulling up data on his tablet. "Cameroon, 2013. 4 days for a conservation investment. Rural area. Known tsetse fly habitat." Within 6 hours, Richard Blackstone's symptoms began to stabilize. The migrating paralysis stopped. His cognitive function showed improvement. The erratic heart rate settled into normal patterns. The treatment Martha had prescribed was working. 20 specialists with their combined centuries of experience had been outsmarted by a housekeeper who'd seen the disease once, 30 years ago. The media found out within days. The story was too perfect to stay contained within the hospital's walls. 20 specialists. Hundreds of millions in medical equipment. The best minds in modern medicine. All defeated by a pattern recognized by a woman they'd dismissed as beneath their notice. A woman who'd walked away from medicine at the height of her career and chosen to clean houses rather than heal bodies. Richard Blackstone's recovery took 3 months. He required intensive treatment, physical therapy, and cognitive rehabilitation. But he survived. The man who'd built an empire on recognizing patterns others missed had been saved by someone he'd never bothered to see. Martha supervised his treatment, working alongside the medical team that now hung on her every word. Dr. Harrison resigned his position at Harvard, his reputation in ruins. Not because he'd missed the diagnosis, but because he'd refused to listen when the answer was being offered. "Why didn't you tell me who you were?" Richard asked Martha one afternoon as she checked his IV line. The same hands that had mopped his floors now adjusted his medication with practiced precision. "Would you have hired me if you'd known? A former doctor, cleaning houses? You would have wondered what was wrong with me, why I wasn't practicing. You would have been suspicious, uncomfortable. I needed the work, and I needed the anonymity more. But you saved my life. I cleaned your house for 5 years, kept your sanctuary spotless while you changed the world. We all serve in our own ways, Mr. Blackstone. The mistake is thinking some forms of service matter more than others." The Blackstone Institute for Tropical Disease Research opened 2 years later. Martha Washington served as its first director, though she insisted on keeping her housekeeping uniform in her office. A reminder, she said, of the importance of seeing everyone. The Institute's first initiative was a program training healthcare workers to listen to observations from non-medical staff. Janitors, food service workers, security guards. The people who see everything because no one sees them. Dr. Harrison applied to work at the institute. Martha reviewed his application personally. She hired him, but with conditions. He would spend his first year working in the facilities department, maintaining the medical equipment he'd once commanded. He would learn to see the hospital from the perspective of those who kept it running behind the scenes. Only then would he be allowed to practice medicine again. The first day of his facilities rotation, Dr. Harrison arrived in his new uniform, navy blue instead of white. His name tag read simply Tom Harrison Maintenance. No doctor, no credentials, no letters after his name. The other maintenance workers knew who he was, of course. The story had been everywhere. But they treated him like any other new employee, showed him how to calibrate the ventilators he'd once ordered others to manage, taught him to recognize the sounds machines make before they fail, guided him through the basement corridors he'd never known existed. By the end of the first month, he'd learned more about how hospitals actually function than in his entire previous career. By the end of the year, he understood that medicine wasn't about the doctors. It was about everyone who made healing possible. The story made headlines worldwide. Medical journals published analyses of the case, focusing on cognitive bias and hierarchical blindness in diagnostic medicine. But Martha refused most interview requests. She had work to do, diseases to track, patterns to recognize. And every morning, she still arrived at 6 sharp, though now through the front entrance. The investigation that followed revealed disturbing patterns. 3 other cases in the past 5 years where non-medical staff had tried to offer observations that could have led to faster diagnoses. A maintenance worker who noticed unusual mold patterns in ventilation systems before a respiratory outbreak. A cafeteria employee who observed specific food combinations triggering allergic reactions the allergy team hadn't identified. A parking attendant who recognized early Parkinson's symptoms in regular visitors years before their official diagnoses. All dismissed, all ignored, all invisible. Richard Blackstone recovered completely. He would live another 15 years, revolutionizing 2 more industries and increasing his charitable giving tenfold. But the lesson that stayed with him wasn't about medicine or mortality. It was about vision. Real vision. The kind that sees beyond titles and uniforms to the human expertise that exists everywhere, waiting to be recognized. I had 20 doctors, he would tell audiences at medical conferences. 20 of the best minds in medicine. But I was saved by one woman who saw what they couldn't because they wouldn't see her. The most expensive lesson I ever learned cost me nothing more than humility. Martha Washington continued to run the institute until her retirement. She trained a generation of doctors to look beyond their assumptions, to listen to anyone who might have an observation, to understand that expertise doesn't always come with credentials. She kept a photo on her desk from that day in the hospital room. 20 doctors in white coats, and one woman in a housekeeping uniform. The woman who saw what they all missed. The day she retired, the Institute's auditorium was packed, not just with doctors and medical professionals, but with janitors, food service workers, maintenance staff, security guards, people who kept hospitals running, people who saw everything because no one saw them. Martha's final speech was brief. "Every person in this room has saved a life," she said. "Some with scalpels, some with mops, some with prescriptions, some with observations. The only difference is that some of you were heard and some of you weren't. Today, that changes. Today, we all have voices. Sometimes the most profound medical mysteries aren't solved by the newest technology or the most published experts. Sometimes they're solved by someone who's been there all along, invisible in plain sight, waiting for just one person to finally listen. In Richard Blackstone's case, it took dying to finally see the woman who'd been keeping him alive all along. Not with medicine, but with the simple act of paying attention. The real tragedy wasn't that 20 doctors missed the diagnosis. It was that they missed it because they wouldn't listen to someone they considered beneath them. The real miracle wasn't the cure. It was that Martha Washington, after 30 years of chosen invisibility, decided that saving a life was worth revealing herself, even if that life belonged to a man who'd never bothered to learn her name. What would you do if you had knowledge that could save someone who'd never acknowledged your existence? Would you speak up, knowing you'd be dismissed? Would you watch them suffer, knowing you had the answer? Or would you, like Martha Washington, try again and again until someone finally listened? The truth is, expertise exists everywhere. In hospital hallways, in service elevators, in the spaces between what we choose to see and what's actually there. The question isn't whether someone has the answer. The question is whether we're willing to hear it from someone we've been trained not to see. Every day, in hospitals around the world, someone like Martha Washington notices something important. A janitor sees a pattern in infection rates. A food service worker observes a correlation in patient reactions. A security guard notices symptoms that don't match the diagnosis. And every day, these observations are dismissed because they come from the wrong source, the wrong uniform, the wrong side of the hierarchy. Richard Blackstone learned that lesson almost too late. 20 doctors couldn't save him, but one housekeeper could. Not because she was better than them, but because she was willing to see what they wouldn't. And because, when it mattered most, she was willing to be seen. The Blackstone Institute now requires all medical staff to spend 1 week each year in a non-medical role. Cleaning, cooking, maintaining. They learn to see their workplace from every angle. They learn that the view from the bottom often reveals things invisible from the top. They learn that expertise isn't about degrees on a wall, but about recognition of patterns, regardless of who recognizes them. Martha Washington's story became required reading in medical schools, not as a medical case study, but as a lesson in humility, in listening, in understanding that the next breakthrough might come not from someone with a Nobel Prize, but from someone with a mop bucket who happened to see something everyone else missed. Because they were looking. Because they cared. Because sometimes the most invisible people see the most. The 20 doctors who failed to diagnose Richard Blackstone weren't bad doctors. They were brilliant minds trapped in a system that taught them whose voices mattered and whose didn't. Martha Washington saved a life by breaking that system, if only for a moment. By insisting that her voice, her observation, her expertise mattered, even if it came wrapped in a housekeeping uniform. That's the real story. Not about a medical mystery solved, but about the mysteries we create when we decide who's worth listening to and who isn't. About the expertise we waste because it comes from unexpected sources. About the lives that could be saved if we could just learn to see everyone who's trying to help us see. Comment below if you've ever had your expertise dismissed because of who you are, rather than what you know. Subscribe for more stories of hidden knowledge and the courage to reveal it. Remember, these aren't just stories. They're reminders that the person you overlook today might be the only one who can save you tomorrow.